Welcome to Inside Startup Investing, the only podcast where you can invest in every guest. On this episode, I will be speaking with co-founder and CEO of Citizens Coffee, Justin Giuffrida. Citizens Coffee is an upstart specialty cafe and lifestyle brand focused on providing premium-grade coffee and food offerings with over $27 million in lifetime sales and rapidly growing. A few things that stood out to me about Citizens Coffee are first, Justin is one of those great examples of founder market fit. So what do I mean by that? Well, you see, Justin is from Australia, where coffee culture is light years ahead of the US in terms of being focused on a premium experience with exceptional coffee products, and more importantly, consumers in Australia demand that coffee houses have to be an appealing destination that isn't just focused on picking up a mobile order, but rather centers on a delightful sit-down experience. Ironically, days after taping this podcast, one of my neighbors that recently traveled to Australia mentioned out of the blue how incredible the coffee shops are in Australia. And that's when I realized how Justin is perfectly aligned to bring that premium coffee house experience to the US. He knows the product that we don't even realize we want yet. Something else that stood out to me is that he and his team have not raised a ton of capital to date, and yet have already begun scaling their store count and sales rapidly across New York and now Texas. Their ability to open stores on a lean budget and drive greater sales than those seen in single Starbucks locations is a testament to their ability to execute at a high level. Lastly, upon further research, it's clear that this premium coffee house experience is on trend and likely to be one of the fastest growing categories in the massive US coffee market. These types of coffee houses are definitely winning over share from industry stalwarts like Starbucks, and I believe this team is well positioned to continue to scale in the right markets across the United States. So with that, let's get on to the show and welcome Justin. Justin, thanks so much for joining us today.
Awesome. Hey, glad to be here. Thanks so much for having me today, Chris.
Oh, it's my pleasure. So for those who don't know you, Justin, let's get a little bit of background on yourself and how you came to co-found Citizens.
Sure, yeah. So before starting Citizens, I was born and raised in Australia. You can probably tell from my accent, I'm not originally from this country. Really came up through the Australian hospitality, specialty coffee scene, the breakfast scene, which I'll talk a little bit about today as well. I worked a lot on the finance and the strategic side of the restaurant business as well. So I worked with some of Australia's biggest and most exciting emerging brands that were coming up, and worked within management, worked on the kind of CFO side of that as well, before making my big move to New York City and then eventually starting Citizens.
That's awesome. So Citizens, what is it? What are you guys up to? And what makes you kind of unique and differentiated in the market? Yeah,
for sure. Great question. So, just to take a step back, I think coming from a market like Australia, we are, I think it's becoming more and more common knowledge and common culture that Australia is one of the global leaders when it comes to the specialty coffee and breakfast scene. I was lucky and fortunate enough to kind of mature and become a professional within that emerging category. And now we're seeing this new category of better breakfast, specialty coffee kind of sweep across the globe. In all major countries, major markets, we're seeing the, Australian cafe or the better breakfast brands really starting to emerge. And I think a really fun depiction of that is, looking at Starbucks as a case study. Back in the year 2000, Starbucks, a brand that had just had such huge success and dominated the US market, entered the Australian market in I think it was about 2001. Within 8 years of operating in that new market, they had closed down about 80% of their stores and really started to kind of recoil back to the US market. And there becomes an interesting question of why was Starbucks not able to really successfully penetrate the Australian market? And it's because our quality of coffee and quality of experience, our consumers are used to such a high bar when it comes to coffee and breakfast that Starbucks weren't really able to commercialize that experience. Now I fast forward to coming to America in 2013, and one of the first things that I experienced in New York City and across the country was that there was just a really there was a bit of a departure from the quality and the experience that I was used to in Australia. And so, going out for that ritual of, my morning coffee and breakfast, whether I was on my own or catching up with friends, that is a real big escape for us in this next generation. Being able to go and get breakfast is beyond a coffee or beyond the food. It's actually an experience, when it comes to service, the environment. And so I saw that as a really big opportunity in this market. And now when I think we get to know the landscape even better, we're seeing that breakfast and specialty coffee is now the fastest growing segment in the US restaurant space. And I really want to zoom in on that because, the US, if we can understand how big the restaurant and coffee industry in the US, it's just an incredibly huge, substantial market. And we've now seen a really big shift. One of the stats that I think is kind of mind-blowing is specialty coffee and breakfast dedicated brands are now up from 9% market share in 1991 to 78% market share in 2023. So we're starting to see the dominance of brands like First Watch, like Blue Bottle, like Starbucks, that weren't really there back in 1991. So, we're now starting to see that these brands are here and here to stay. And the next generation of consumers, they're really looking for a better experience. They're looking for chef-driven menus, better ingredients, and ultimately better service and environment. And I think that's what Citizens is here to answer in the country. We're here as an all-day breakfast brand and a specialty coffee brand. I'll talk more about how that model actually works under one roof and how we're two concepts under one roof. But before I do, I just really wanted to kind of paint that picture that the US market and the coffee and breakfast market is going through a big change. And this, a lot of that change comes from Starbucks' success in the US market. They've taken this market from Peet's Coffee in a can, where everyone was having instant coffee and coffee at home and in the office. They've just done such a great job with commercializing coffee that they've made espresso, culture, the latte, frappuccinos, all of those beloved drinks that we love in the US. They've really commercialized that across the country, and they've brought an experience to the market. Now, and the biggest group of consumers that they've really affected is this next generation of consumers, namely the millennials and the younger generations that are becoming the main consumers in the market. They're now really conditioned and demanding a better experience. They want a better environment. They want better experiences. They want better ingredients. And I think Citizens comes right at the perfect time at the front of this exploding wave of coffee and breakfast culture as a new, fresh take, as a new experiential brand that is here to really kind of win the space and be one of the players that wins the space.
You hit on a couple of things there that I just wanted to dive in on. So first off, when Starbucks came about, right, they talked a lot about this concept of, I think they call it like the third place. There's home, there's office, and then there's somewhere in the middle, right, where there's social, there's community. And over the years, that's actually kind of eroded at Starbucks, right? It's become very mobile first. And so it doesn't have that same experience of being that gathering spot. And while it may seem like a small thing, it actually plays a really pivotal role in people's spend and deciding to go there, so on and so forth. So would love to hear a little bit from you, how you think about that concept and serving that role in the market, and how that kind of helps differentiate you from Starbucks, which has become far more transactional than it is community-based.
You really touch on just a really tremendous part of what Citizens is. And, that's a little bit what I was touching on earlier, which is, Starbucks has done a great job. It's not to take away from what they've built and what they've commercialized. And in a sense, they're a bit of a market maker, right? Because they've really paved the way for this commercialized coffee industry. However, that notion of the third space, a space where people can come and gather and take a break from the office or the workplace or their home to grab a coffee, catch up, that has really just, the priority has become convenience, not experience. And I think Citizens really is substantially different to that. if you walk into a Citizens restaurant, to talk a little bit about what we are a coffee shop and a breakfast restaurant all under one roof. So we're actually two concepts under one roof. And if you walk in, the way that we present and position our brand is about experience, and that goes from the thoughtfulness of the product to the design of our spaces, and all the way through to our baristas knowing our locals by name, face, and order, right? So we really try to get to know our locals, provide great hospitality, great experience that goes beyond a cup of coffee, and really try to kind of tailor that experience for our locals as well. And we've seen great success in doing that. I'll talk a little bit more about our economics just a little bit later in the podcast. But we're seeing that our per store sales are now substantially higher than an average Starbucks. Citizens is now averaging $2.5 million in sales per location, whereas Starbucks is still trending around 1.9. So we're seeing that the kind of the new approach and the experience that we're providing within our restaurants and our coffee shops is working. It's attracting a really loyal following. And we're now going to proceed with strategically rolling that out and scaling that across the country. So Chris, I'd love to tell you a little bit more about maybe what Citizens is and what the experience is for our guests.
No, I think that would be great. And just before we get into that, tell us a little bit about the markets that you're currently in. And are you franchising this model, or are you kind of the owner operators of these businesses? Once we get through that, I'd love to hear a little bit more about what the concept actually looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. So right now we've got locations. We were born and raised in New York City. We opened 4 locations in New York. We've now made the jump, a really important jump for an emerging restaurant brand. We've now made the jump to Houston, Texas. We had the strongest launch in Houston, Texas that the brand has ever had. And we're now due to open in Austin in December. So you can see that the brand is really we're turning a corner and we're starting to really scale up quickly. But today we're in New York, Houston, and soon to be Austin as well, and looking to emerge into new markets in the coming years as well. And alongside those expansions, I think it's super important to gauge, well, how successful are those expansions? And some of the biggest metrics that we look at, we're a very data-driven brand. And some of the biggest metrics that we look at is, restaurant level sales, and guest reviews and guest sentiment, right? And, across all of our restaurants, we've got over 10,000 reviews at a 4.7 rating across Google, which is best in class across the country. And our units are doing $2.5 million in average sales. So that means that some of the units are doing, substantially higher. Some of them are doing a little bit lower, but the average across the board is 2.5. When we look at that across publicly listed companies like Starbucks and First Watch as coffee and breakfast brands, we are performing substantially higher, even at this early stage. Now, as the brand grows, the brand equity grows, the model grows, we are going to see our unit volumes only go higher as we start to establish a more brand authority. So we want to get Citizens to about a $3 million per location spend. But even before I start talking about some of the economics, I want to paint the picture of what it feels like to walk into a Citizens for those who haven't visited one of our locations. So we're a breakfast restaurant and a coffee shop bakery under one roof. And we were really intentional about being these two concepts together. So when you walk into Citizens on any given day, you walk in, you will see, the coffee shop and the bakery counter, and you'll see a line forming of all of our customers getting their morning fix, their lattes, drip coffee, their croissants, banana bread. So we've got this really healthy channel of a coffee shop, which is more of a quick service for our locals. And then you'll see a whole dining room full of about 100, 120 seats of full service, sit down breakfast customers. Now, those two dynamics is pretty uncommon in the US. We either have a coffee shop where you just get your coffee and your bakery goods, or you have a restaurant. But rarely do you see the two converge together under one roof, working well in concert. And I want to talk more about that because it's part of why we generate these high amount of sales. We design our restaurants, we design our operations to have a symbiotic relationship of two concepts under one roof. And what ends up happening, Chris, is that the two cross-pollinate really, really well. For those who are coffee lovers, which is probably most people listening to this podcast, coffee is a really sticky product, is what we call it. It's super habitual. And if you like your local, coffee shop, you're there. You're not there once a month or twice a month. You're there every day, And I think a lot of people discover Citizens through becoming a morning coffee customer, and then they really stick with us. And then they eventually discover that there's a whole breakfast restaurant side of the brand where they see the dining room full of breakfast customers, the music's turned up, everyone's having a great time. We've got fresh juices, smoothies, cocktails as well. And so the two kind of cross-pollinate. Breakfast customers discover and become a coffee customer, and coffee customers become breakfast customers really quickly. And that's what helps us ramp up to best-in-class sales across national products as well. So, yeah.
One of the things that I wanted to hit on, everything that you're talking about here is around quality, right? And one of the ways in which you can control that is if you're the owner-operators. When you think about scaling the business, is franchising in the cards, or are you really focused on being owner-operators of all of these locations?
Yeah, quality and experience is at the forefront of what we do. So, especially in the core stages of our growth over the next decade, we're not going to be a franchise brand, at least in the US. We're going to be a company-owned brand. Our restaurants have best-in-class reviews and best-in-class profit. Now, we are eager to actually be the ones in the driver's seats who own, operate, and scale that model. So we're going to continue to be company-owned. We are exploring and in conversation with some international licensing deals. Two big customer segments that love and follow Citizens from the data that we follow is from the Asian market and the European market. So we're already exploring a master licensing deal in Asia and already starting to research and understand the European landscape as well.
Now, one of the other things, there's obviously a broad spectrum of independent coffee shops. Obviously, you have the Starbucks and the Pete's of the world. It's a crowded space in many regards, right? And so when people are thinking about investing in a company, one of the things you want to think about is, the competition that's alongside you and how much effort it's going to take to kind of beat the incumbency that's out there. You've definitely hit on kind of the differentiators of this breakfast concept meets coffee house. But when you think about competition and execution and kind of winning in this market, what do you think are some of the key pieces that really drive success?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, I actually think that this market is quite segmented. There's the coffee and breakfast market is going through change and is becoming really segmented, right? And instead of thinking about this whole market as who's going to win the whole space, we're looking at this as actually a really big league with major players winning the space together. And, we can already see that this next generation of millennials, Gen Z, who are really becoming the market's main consumer, they're already demanding brands like Citizens because of the experience, because of the execution that we provide every day. And as we scale Citizens, that level of execution and brand equity and authority only gets bigger. If you have loved Citizens in New York, well, you're going to love us in Miami. And if you love us in Miami, New York, well, you're also going to love the Citizens brand in Texas and all the other markets that we're emerging into as well. So, that's a really common question that we get, that, this is a market that can be crowded. However, it is very segmented and it's going through change. And what we're seeing, and even that statistics that I provided earlier, we're seeing consumers move away from the diner and move away from brands like Starbucks into new brands like Citizens, who are really providing a higher level of service, environment, more innovation within their product as well. And having a more of a personalized experience in store as well.
One of the other things that's so crucial to profitability and strong economics is the upstart cost of opening these new branches. How long does it often take to open a new location? What are the costs involved in getting one of these locations off the ground?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's another factor that differentiates us from some of the public brands. So, I think when flat is faster, right? And we're a startup brand. We have this unfair advantage that we have found a really nimble way to open our locations. All of the locations to date that we've opened have been below 400,000. So we're now using $400,000 as a new CapEx expense to get one of our Citizens locations opened and operating inside of 3 months. So we're faster and we're leaner. And so we're able to make decisions, without that fatigue, without that full process that bigger national brands have. And we can expand cheaper and faster. And we're seeing that already. We're winning deals. We're expanding a lot faster than some of the more legacy brands. Whereas a Starbucks, typically costs around $1 million to open. We're less than half of that cost, and we're generating higher sales. So the ability for Citizens to, first of all, be more efficient with the capital in expansion, but then be more powerful with repaying that capital back with our profit, is starting to build this economic model that fuels its own growth. So the bigger that Citizens gets, the more profitability and power that we have, that builds this economic model that we can actually start to fuel our growth with non-dilutive capital, and create a lot of shareholder value there as well. And Chris, one other factor that I wanted to talk about is we see some of the most directional, successful brands that are emerging today are not just statically a restaurant brand, but they're at the intersection of being more of a lifestyle brand. So one of the biggest developments that we've made at Citizens is we're now pushing the brand into the intersection of being a restaurant brand and also a CPG brand. So we've just launched a new division of the company, which is now distributing our coffee products, pod coffee, beans, and K-Cups across the country and in grocery. Because we're seeing that if you can develop the brand and to have the authority where our customers can experience us at one of our locations across the nation, at the grocery store, and at the office, then we then become a household breakfast and coffee brand. And so that's where we're pushing Citizens today. So, one of the interesting stats out there right now that shows you how changing the coffee market is that pod coffee, so some of the Nespresso pods, pod coffee, K-Cups, is now set to overtake instant coffee in the coming years. And we're seeing that as a massive opportunity for the brand, because we can really start to have authority as you start to find Citizens in one of your markets and you love your experience, you love your breakfast and your coffee there. You're also able to, you're going to see our products at the local grocery store and in office, and then that becomes multiple touch points for our consumers across the country.
Well, and hitting on that kind of brand affinity and being able to get people at multiple different locations, one of the kind of brilliant things that I think Starbucks has done over the past 15, 20 years is, frankly, they don't really market, right? But on every corner of every major, street, whether you're in New York or DC or wherever you may be, you see the Starbucks logo. Right. And so they really don't spend on marketing outside of really just the brand positioning, right? When you think about Citizens and growing the brand and getting more people in the door, does that involve real hard marketing dollars, or is it really just about being present, having PR, existing with your locations, and having more locations for people to see and interact with?
Yeah, absolutely. It's this is something that we think about and develop at Citizens. You'd be surprised to hear that we haven't spent a single dollar of marketing on our products and our brand. We are, when I think about the Citizens brand and you experience the coffees and how beautiful a latte looks and how beautiful some of our breakfast dishes that we design, they market themselves, especially when you stand back and think about who our growing customer base is. Millennials and that market, that broad subset of market, they're very savvy with social media. They're very savvy with technology. And so when they see something that they love, well, guess what? They broadcast it, and they essentially market our brand for us. So, we're seeing that our social, we've got around 50,000 followers on our social media channel, which is just such a big leg up for the brand our size. It's just such a big following. And that goes back to the way that the brand is designed, the way that the product is designed. It makes our customers and our locals really kind of sit up in their chair when their coffee hits the table. And that's part of the experience of Citizens. So we look at the stores, Chris, almost as like the church to evangelists who follow the brand, right? Almost same way that when you go into an Apple store across the country, it is such a sleek and beautiful experience for their customers that it goes hand in hand with buying products online. And when I think about Citizens units and locations across the country now, that provides such an amazing brand experience for our customers that when they see our coffee products in the grocery and when they see our coffee products online, they've already got this amazing kind of brand sentiment because they've experienced it in real life. They've experienced it, what it tastes like, what it feels like to be there. So the marketing piece of Citizens is something that is just really efficient. Millennials and new customers market our products themselves. We've been featured in some of the top publications across the country, like Vogue, New York Times, Departures, and Forbes as well. And they're all picking up the Citizens brand because of the way that we execute. We're executing as best in class, coffee and breakfast brands, and we're getting picked up and noted by the biggest publications that we all read because of the job that we're doing, in our operations and in our brand.
What does top line revenue look like today, and how many locations do you have? And what does success look like on that perspective in 2 to 3 years?
Yeah, for sure. So this year in 2024, we're projected to close at $8.4 million of revenue. If I think back to 2021, the last time we raised capital, we've more than tripled our sales since that point. And we're also on track to record $1.1 million of unit level EBITDA. Again, when I present the unit level economics compared to Starbucks or a First Watch, we're substantially ahead of per location sales. And when I think about the future, when I think about the vision of where the brand is growing, we're projected to have, or we're really developing a pipeline of 40 locations by 2029. We know that with our average unit level sales, if we can reach 40 locations in the coming years, we're going to be a $100 million a year company. And we know that that's a really exciting inflection point to be at with comparable brands that we study. So $100 million, we'll have a really healthy buffer of EBITDA at that point, and we will be in a really exciting position to explore, either mergers and acquisitions, potential IPOs, strategic partners, and international expansion as well.
I will give you the last word here for those who are on the line or thinking about investing. What's your kind of last pitch to them?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think Citizens is at a really exciting point now because we've already proven that the brand works and works across multiple markets. We're profitable in New York, we're profitable in Texas. And now from here on in, it's all about strategically scaling and building what is already working across the country. And the CPG element is, a new exciting vertical and a big opportunity for our brand. And the last thing that I'll say is, this frontier, there's already brands that have proven once we get to a certain level of inflection that have already, proven what the return can be for shareholders like myself. We've already seen, Chobani purchase La Colombe for over $1 billion. We've seen Nestle purchase Blue Bottle Coffee for $750 million. We're seeing that brands that get to 40, 50, 60 locations, a healthy inflection point of revenue, strategic partners will come along. So that's what we're working towards, scaling what is already successful at Citizens. On Start Engine, we're approaching $500,000 raised in the first couple of months on launch. And we're going to be looking to close that round in the coming months as well. So if anybody, we host monthly webinars, any questions, please send them through to us in Start Engine. We'd be really excited to welcome our new investors on board, the Citizens journey.
If you like what you heard on the show today, you can check out why they scored a 3.5 at kingscrowd.com. And you can now invest on Start Engine until November 25th, 2024. And please like, subscribe, and share our podcast wherever you listen to podcasts so more listeners like you can find us. Thanks for listening.